Her face hit the table once, then again, then harder. Food, blood, and humiliation smeared together as the rich man laughed and told her to eat. What he didn't see was the man in the black suit standing up behind him. And that silence meant his life was already over. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. Arthur Vandenberghe heard the slap before he saw what caused it. Sharp, clean, the sound of skin meeting skin with force behind it. He'd heard that sound before. In rooms where men learned consequences, where silence was currency and patience was power. His hand paused on his water glass. At the center of the diner, a woman stood frozen near one of the booths, her worn handbag clutched tight against her chest. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, clothes that had been washed too many times, shoes with worn heels. She was speaking softly to a man seated at the table, her voice apologetic. The man in the burgundy suit jacket rose from his seat, towering over her. His slicked back hair caught the diner's overhead lights. Everything about him screamed money, the tailored fit of his jacket, the expensive watch on his wrist, the arrogance in his posture. Simon Phillips. Arthur knew the name, knew the reputation, knew exactly what kind of man stood in front of that trembling woman. "Do you know who I am?" Simon's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Do I look like someone who manages people like you?" The woman, blonde hair pulled back, face pale with hunger or fear, or both, opened her mouth to respond. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to. I thought you were—" Simon's hand moved faster than she could process. The slap echoed through the diner. Her head snapped to the side. The handbag fell from her grip, contents spilling across the floor. A wallet, tissues, a folded piece of paper that looked like it had been read 100 times. She stumbled backward, one hand rising instinctively to her burning cheek. Simon stepped forward. "You thought I was what?" he demanded. "The manager? Do I look like I work here?" "Please," she whispered. "I'm sorry. He grabbed a fistful of her hair. The diner collectively inhaled. Simon yanked her forward, forcing her down toward the table where his half-eaten meal sat cooling. Plates, silverware, a glass of water that tipped and spilled as he shoved her closer. "I said," Simon hissed, his face inches from hers. "Do I look like I manage people like you?" He slammed her face into the table. Once. The impact was brutal. Her forehead hit the wood hard enough to rattle the dishes. Ketchup and grease smeared across her cheek as Simon ground her face into the mess. "Eat," he commanded, his voice dripping with contempt. She gasped, struggling to breathe through the humiliation and pain. Her hands scrabbled against the table edge, trying to push herself up. Simon slammed her down again. Harder this time. Blood appeared, a thin line from her nose mixing with the sauce already staining her skin. "Say you're sorry," Simon ordered. "I'm sorry," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "Please, I'm so sorry." He pulled her head up just enough to let her speak clearly, then drove it back down into the table with sickening force. The sound was worse the third time, flesh and bone against unforgiving wood. Someone in the back booth gasped. A woman covered her mouth. A teenage boy held up his phone, recording everything with shaking hands. No one intervened. Simon's friends, 2 younger men seated at a nearby table, laughed. One of them raised his phone higher, making sure to capture the perfect angle. "That's what you get for interrupting my meal," Simon said, finally releasing her hair. The woman collapsed against the booth, sliding halfway to the floor. Her breathing came in ragged sobs. Blood dripped from her nose onto her gray sweater, already stained, already worn thin from too many washes and not enough rest between them. Simon straightened his burgundy jacket, smoothing down the fabric as if brushing off dust. He turned to his friends with a satisfied smirk. "Some people need to learn their place," he announced to the room. That's when Arthur moved. Not quickly, not dramatically. He simply stood. The motion was quiet, controlled, but something about it pulled every eye in the diner toward him. Arthur Vandenberghe was not a tall man, but presence had nothing to do with height. His black suit was immaculate, no tie, collar open just enough to seem casual despite the clear expense of the tailoring. His dark hair was neatly styled, though a few strands fell across his forehead. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, cold, focused, the kind of eyes that had seen violence and chosen when to deliver it. He walked forward with measured steps, hands loose at his sides. Simon noticed the movement and turned, irritation flashing across his features. "What?" Simon snapped. You got a problem? Arthur didn't answer immediately. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze dropping briefly to the woman still trembling on the floor, then rising back to Simon's face. I think, Arthur said quietly, you've made enough noise. Simon's friends went silent. The teenager lowered his phone. Simon laughed a short, sharp bark of disbelief. Who the hell are you supposed to be? Arthur tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. Then he stepped closer, close enough that Simon had to look up just slightly to maintain eye contact. Someone, Arthur said, his voice barely above a whisper. You should have recognized sooner. Simon's smirk faltered. Arthur let the silence stretch, let it press against Simon's bravado until cracks began to show. Then Arthur leaned in, just enough that only Simon could hear what came next. The Vanderbilt deal, Arthur murmured. The one you tried to reroute through your shell company last month. Ring any bells? Simon's face went pale. Arthur straightened, taking one step back. His expression never changed. No anger, no satisfaction, just fact. You'll hear from me, Arthur said. Then he turned and walked toward the woman still crumpled against the booth. He crouched down, extending one hand. She stared at him through tear-streaked eyes, confusion and fear battling across her face. Can you stand? Arthur asked gently. She nodded, though her hands shook as she accepted his help. Arthur pulled her upright with careful strength, steadying her when she swayed. He picked up her fallen handbag, gathering the scattered contents without looking at them, and pressed it back into her hands. Go, he said softly. You're done here. She opened her mouth whether to thank him or ask who he was. Arthur would never know. He was already walking toward the exit. Behind him, Simon stood frozen, his burgundy jacket suddenly feeling too tight. The diner remained silent, and in that silence, Simon Phillips realized he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. Daniela Mitchell sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the blood-stained tissue in her hands. Her face throbbed. Her nose had finally stopped bleeding, but the humiliation that burned hotter than any physical pain. She could still feel Simon Phillips's hand in her hair, could still smell the grease and ketchup that had smeared across her cheek, could still hear the laughter. The room was small, cheap, $15 a night at a place that didn't ask questions as long as you paid cash. The kind of place where the shower leaked and the mattress had springs that dug into your back no matter how you positioned yourself. But it was shelter, and shelter was more than Daniela had most nights. She stood slowly, wincing as her body reminded her of every impact, and walked to the cracked mirror above the dresser. The woman staring back looked like a stranger, bruise forming on her left cheekbone, split skin near her hairline, eyes red from crying and exhaustion. When did I become this person? The answer came unbidden. 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Daniela had a different reflection. She'd worn clean clothes that fit properly. Her hair had been professionally cut. Her smile had come easier, even if her marriage hadn't been perfect. Thomas Mitchell had been a good man. Not wealthy, not powerful, but steady. He worked construction, came home tired, and never raised his voice. Their apartment had been small, but theirs. Their life had been simple but stable. Then his heart stopped on a job site. No warning, no goodbye, just a phone call that ended everything. Daniela had stood in the hospital hallway, numb, while a doctor with kind eyes explained that sometimes these things just happened. Undiagnosed condition, nothing anyone could have done. The funeral was small. Thomas didn't have many friends. He'd been a quiet man who kept to himself. But his brother came, Richard Mitchell, wearing an expensive suit and an expression that looked like sympathy if you didn't know him well. Daniela had known him well enough. We'll take care of everything, Richard had promised, squeezing her shoulder. Your family. She'd believed him. For exactly 1 week. The first sign came when Daniela tried to access their joint savings account. Account closed. She'd called the bank, certain it was a mistake. The representative had been apologetic but firm. The account had been closed by the secondary holder Richard Mitchell, who'd been added years ago when Thomas needed help managing finances during a previous medical issue. Daniela had called Richard immediately. It's for your own good, he'd explained, his voice smooth. You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. I'm protecting Thomas's money until you're in a better place mentally. That's my money too, Daniela had said, her voice shaking. I need it to pay rent, to eat. You don't need to worry about any of that. I'll help you. But first, we need to talk about the apartment. The apartment that had been in Thomas's name. The apartment Richard now controlled as executor of his brother's minimal estate. You can't stay there, Richard had said. It's too expensive. Too many memories. I've already found someone to sublet it. You can stay with me and Patricia for a while, just until you get back on your feet. Daniela had refused. She'd found a lawyer, a tired-looking woman who'd reviewed the documents and delivered the truth Daniela already knew in her gut. Legally, he's within his rights. Your husband didn't have a will. Under state law, the brother has authority as next of kin to manage the estate. And since your name isn't on the lease or the account, Daniela had left that office with nothing but the knowledge that everything she thought was hers had never legally belonged to her at all. The eviction notice came 2 weeks after the funeral. Daniela packed what she could carry into 2 suitcases and left the rest behind. Clothes, photos. The coffee maker Thomas had bought her for their anniversary. All of it abandoned because Richard wanted her gone and had the power to make it happen. She'd tried calling him one last time. "Why are you doing this?" she'd asked, her voice breaking. "Thomas loved me. He would never—" "Thomas is dead," Richard had interrupted. "And you were always a burden he couldn't afford. I'm not going to enable your dependence the way my brother did." The line went dead. Daniela had stood on the sidewalk outside her former home, 2 suitcases at her feet, and realized she was completely alone. The shelters came first. Cold buildings filled with desperate people and overworked staff. Daniela had stayed in 3 different ones over the course of a month, moving when beds filled up or when the maximum stay limit kicked in. She'd applied for jobs, dozens of them. But her work history was sparse. She'd stayed home the last few years after a car accident had left her with chronic pain that made standing for long periods difficult. Employers saw the gaps in her resume and moved on to the next applicant. The money she'd had in her personal checking account, barely $300, ran out quickly. Then came the cheap motels, the $15 rooms. The nights sleeping in her car when even that became too expensive. Hunger became constant. Daniela learned to stretch a single meal across an entire day, learned which gas stations threw out still edible food, learned which churches offered free dinners on which nights. She lost weight, lost hope, but she never stopped looking for work. That's what had brought her to the diner. She'd seen the help wanted sign in the window and felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. Waitressing meant tips. Tips meant cash. Cash meant food and maybe a real room somewhere. She'd walked in with her last bit of dignity wrapped around her like armor. She'd spotted Simon Phillips sitting alone, expensive suit jacket perfectly tailored, posture radiating authority. Everything about him screamed management, success, power to hire. Daniela had approached carefully, rehearsing her words. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt." She'd been polite, apologetic, small. Everything women like her were supposed to be when asking men like him for anything. And he'd destroyed her for it. Now, standing in this motel room with blood still crusted under her fingernails, Daniela felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope, not yet, but anger, quiet, burning. Directed not just at Simon Phillips, but at every person who'd watched and done nothing. At Richard, who'd stolen her life. At the world that had taught her to apologize for existing. At herself, for believing that being small and polite would keep her safe. Her phone buzzed. Daniela picked it up, expecting nothing. She had no one left to call. No one left who cared. The text was from an unknown number. "Medical care has been arranged for you. Address below. No cost. No questions. You deserve better than what happened today." Below the message was an address 2 blocks away. No signature. No explanation. Daniela stared at the screen, her heart hammering. She thought of the man in the black suit, the one who'd helped her stand, the one who'd looked at Simon Phillips like he was already dead. Her hands trembled as she saved the address, and for the first time in 3 months, Daniela Mitchell wondered if maybe, just maybe, someone had finally seen her. Arthur Vandenberg didn't go home after leaving the diner. He went to his car, a black Mercedes sedan parked 3 blocks away, and sat in silence for exactly 2 minutes. Not because he needed to calm down. Arthur was always calm. But because men who moved too quickly made mistakes, and Arthur hadn't survived 15 years in his profession by making mistakes. He pulled out his phone and dialed. The line connected on the first ring. "It happened," Arthur said simply. The voice on the other end was rough, aged by cigarettes and decades of careful speech. "The Phillips boy?" "Yes. And he's worse than we thought." Arthur's fingers drummed once against the steering wheel, the only outward sign of the cold fury building beneath his composed exterior. Public. Brutal. No restraint. The woman? Collateral. Wrong place, wrong time. Arthur paused. "I've arranged care for her." A long exhale on the other end. "You're certain he doesn't know who you are?" "He knows the name now. Not the face. Not yet." Arthur started the engine. "But he will. Be careful, Arthur. The Phillips family has protection. Money. Lawyers." "I'm aware." Arthur's voice dropped lower. But protection only works when people are watching, and I'm very good at making people look away. The line went dead. Arthur pulled into traffic, his mind already 3 moves ahead. Simon Phillips had been a problem for 6 weeks. Not the kind of problem that announced itself with violence or threats. The kind that operated in shadows, skimming money from shared ventures, redirecting shipments, slowly positioning himself to undermine territory that didn't belong to him. Arthur's territory. The Vandenberghe family had controlled the city's port operations for 3 generations. Legitimate businesses built on carefully maintained relationships, backed by the kind of power that didn't need to advertise itself. Politicians knew the name. Police knew better than to look too closely. Competitors knew to negotiate, not challenge. Simon Phillips had decided rules didn't apply to him. It started small. A shipping container that arrived late. A warehouse lease that mysteriously fell through. Arthur had noticed the pattern immediately. Someone was testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push before consequences materialized. Arthur had his people investigate. They'd traced it back to Phillips Enterprises, a real estate and investment firm run by Simon's father, Gregory Phillips. Old money. Established reputation. The kind of family that donated to museums and had their names on hospital wings. But beneath the philanthropic facade, Gregory Phillips was expanding, aggressively. His son Simon was the tip of that spear, young, ambitious, and too arrogant to understand that some territories came with invisible borders you crossed at your own peril. Arthur had planned to handle it quietly. A meeting. A clear explanation of boundaries. Perhaps a small financial consequence to reinforce the lesson. Then he'd watched Simon Phillips slam a starving woman's face into a table for asking for a job. And Arthur had realized Simon wasn't just a business problem. He was a cancer that needed to be cut out completely. The medical clinic was small, discreet, and asked no questions. Arthur had used it before for people who needed care but couldn't afford hospitals, or couldn't risk official records. The doctor, an older man named Hayes, owed Arthur more favors than either of them bothered counting anymore. Arthur called ahead. I'm sending someone to you. Woman, mid-30s, facial injuries, possible concussion. She'll be frightened. Be gentle. Understood. The usual arrangement? Bill me directly. If she asks about cost, tell her it's covered by a community fund. Nothing traceable to me. Hayes had worked with Arthur long enough not to ask questions. She'll be taken care of. Arthur had then sent the text message to Daniela Mitchell, her name and number lifted from the credit card that had fallen from her bag in the diner. He'd memorized both before returning her belongings. Information was currency. And Arthur believed in staying rich. Now, driving through the city streets as afternoon faded into evening, Arthur considered his next move. Simon Phillips needed to understand what he'd stepped into. But understanding required fear, and fear required build-up. Arthur could have Simon eliminated tonight, a single phone call, an unfortunate accident, problem solved. But that would be merciful. And mercy was something Arthur reserved for people who deserved it. Simon Phillips had laughed while grinding a desperate woman's face into spilled food, had treated human suffering as entertainment, had built his entire existence on the assumption that wealth and family name insulated him from consequences. Arthur intended to dismantle that assumption piece by piece. He pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a building he owned under 3 different shell companies, took the private elevator to the 7th floor, walked down a hallway where every security camera had been strategically positioned to capture nothing. His office was sparse. Desk, chair, filing cabinet, window overlooking the city. No personal photographs, no decorations, nothing that revealed more than necessary. Arthur sat down and opened his laptop. The file on Simon Phillips was already comprehensive. 6 weeks of surveillance, financial records, phone logs, known associates. Arthur scrolled through it methodically, looking for pressure points. Simon's friends, trust fund children with expensive habits and no real responsibilities. Easily influenced, easily frightened. Simon's father, Gregory Phillips, whose legitimate business empire depended on maintaining a spotless public image. A son's very public brutality could damage that carefully cultivated reputation. Simon's finances surprisingly leveraged. The expensive suits and arrogant posture hid significant debt. Gambling, mostly. Simon liked to bet on things he thought he understood, and usually didn't. Arthur made notes. Connections began forming in his mind, strategies taking shape. His phone buzzed. A text from Hayes. Patient arrived. Treating now. Multiple contusions, minor laceration, no concussion. She asked 3 times if this was real. Told her yes. She cried. Arthur stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed a response. Make sure she has food, real food, and give her the address for the shelter on Morrison Street. Tell her they're expecting her. Private room, no time limit. Already done. Arthur set the phone down. Most people thought power meant being loud, meant making people see you, fear you, acknowledge your dominance. Simon Phillips thought power meant humiliating a starving woman in public while his friends filmed it. But Arthur had learned different lessons in different rooms. Real power was patient. Real power moved in silence. Real power didn't announce itself. It simply appeared when the moment was right. And by then, it was already too late to run. Simon Phillips had no idea what was coming. He thought he'd humiliated a nobody and been interrupted by a stranger. He didn't know the stranger had a name that could end bloodlines. He didn't know the investigation had been running for weeks. He didn't know that everything he'd built his identity on was about to collapse. Arthur Vandenberge opened a new file on his computer. He titled it, Consequences, and he began to type. Simon Phillips stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse apartment, swirling bourbon in a crystal glass, and tried to convince himself he wasn't nervous. The city sprawled below him, lights glittering like scattered diamonds, traffic flowing in rivers of red and white. From up here, everything looked small, manageable, beneath him. That's how Simon preferred to see the world. But the man's words kept echoing in his head. The Vanderbilt deal. The one you tried to reroute through your shell company last month? Simon took a long drink. It was probably nothing. Some low-level investigator his father had hired to keep tabs on business operations. Gregory Phillips was always paranoid about competition, always looking over his shoulder at enemies that existed more in his imagination than reality. Simon's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and ignored it. His friends, probably still laughing about the diner incident. The video had already made its rounds through their private group chat. 23 messages, mostly crying laughing emojis and comments about putting trash in its place. Simon smiled despite himself. That's what the woman had been. Trash. The kind of desperate nobody who thought she could interrupt his meal and waste his time with her pathetic existence. He'd done the world a favor. Simon Phillips had been doing the world favors his entire life. At least that's what his father had always told him. We're Phillips men, Gregory would say, usually while looking over quarterly reports or preparing for another charity gala. We don't apologize for success. We don't bow to people who haven't earned our respect. The world needs men who understand their value. Simon had understood his value from an early age. He was 7 when he'd pushed another boy off the playground equipment at his private school. The boy had broken his arm. Simon's father had made a donation to the school, and the incident disappeared from all official records. See? Gregory had said on the drive home. Money fixes everything. Remember that. Simon remembered. At 14, he'd been caught cheating on exams. His father hired lawyers who threatened the school with defamation lawsuits. The teacher who'd reported it was quietly let go at the end of the semester. At 19, there'd been an incident at a college party. A girl who'd drunk too much, who couldn't remember details, who'd told friends that something had happened she hadn't wanted. Simon's father had settled quietly, and the girl transferred to a school on the opposite coast. These things happen, Gregory had explained. Women get confused. They regret their choices and try to blame men of value. We protect ourselves. That's what money is for. Simon had learned the lesson well. By 25, he was working for Phillips Enterprises, handling special projects, the ventures his father didn't want officially connected to the family name. Real estate deals that required pressure, business acquisitions that needed motivation, territory expansion that demanded a certain flexibility with rules. Simon excelled at it. He wasn't bound by his father's old-world caution. Gregory still believed in maintaining appearances, in playing the long game, in avoiding unnecessary attention. Simon believed in taking what you wanted and daring anyone to stop you. The Vanderbilt deal had been Simon's idea. Phillips Enterprises had been negotiating a partnership with Vanderbilt Logistics, a shipping and warehousing operation that controlled significant port access. The deal was straightforward. Shared warehouse space, split profits on certain shipping routes, mutual benefit. But Simon saw opportunity. The Vanderbilt operation was old, established, comfortable. The kind of business that ran on handshake agreements and reputation. They weren't watching the details closely enough. Simon had created a shell company, Bennett and Associates, and quietly rerouted 3 shipments through it before they reached the official shared warehouse. Small amounts, test runs, enough to skim profit without triggering immediate red flags. It had worked perfectly, until today, until the man in the black suit had said those words. The Vanderbilt deal. Simon finished his bourbon and poured another. He pulled out his phone and opened the group chat with his friends. Simon. Anyone know who runs Vanderbilt Logistics? The responses came quickly. Tyler. No idea. Why? James. Some old family business, I think. Why are you asking? Simon. Just curious. Someone mentioned it today. Tyler. This about the diner thing? Dude, that video is gold. James. You should post it publicly. Simon. Not yet. Keep it private for now. He switched to a different contact. His father's assistant, a woman who'd worked for Gregory for 15 years and knew how to find information quietly. Simon. Need background on Vanderbilt Logistics. Owners, operations, any family connections. Discreet. Margaret. I'll have something by morning. Simon set the phone down and walked to the window again. He tried to recall the man's face. Dark hair, black suit, calm eyes. Nothing particularly memorable except for the way he'd moved, like he had all the time in the world, like he knew something Simon didn't. That look bothered Simon more than he wanted to admit. The thing people didn't understand about Simon Phillips was that he'd built his entire identity on a simple truth. Fear worked. You didn't need to be the smartest person in the room. You didn't need to be the most talented. You just needed to be willing to do what others weren't, to cross lines others respected, to make examples that people remembered, like the woman in the diner. Simon hadn't planned to hit her. He'd been having a decent day until she'd interrupted his meal with her pathetic request. But when she'd looked at him with those desperate, hopeful eyes, when she'd assumed he was some kind of manager who might help her, something in him had snapped. The audacity of it. The assumption that he would lower himself to interact with someone so clearly beneath him. So he'd taught her a lesson. And he'd made sure everyone in that diner understood what happened when you forgot your place in the world's natural order. It was the same lesson he'd been teaching his whole life. Simon Phillips doesn't lose. Not to teachers who thought grades mattered. Not to girls who regretted their choices. Not to business partners who didn't read the fine print. And certainly not to some stranger in a black suit who thought dropping a business name would scare him. Simon's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Yes? Silence on the other end. Not dead air. Simon could hear breathing. Someone was there, listening. Who is this? Simon demanded. More silence. Then, just before Simon would have hung up, a voice. Calm, familiar from the diner. You should have recognized me, Simon. Simon's hand tightened on the glass. Who the hell? Arthur Vandenberge. In case you were wondering. The name hit Simon like cold water. Vandenberge. Not Vanderbilt. Vandenberge. I don't know what you think you... 3 shipments, Arthur continued, his voice never rising above conversational. Bennett and Associates. Registered to an address that doesn't exist. Using paperwork signed by people who don't work for Phillips Enterprises. Simon's throat went dry. You've been stealing from me for 6 weeks, Arthur said. I was planning to handle it quietly. A conversation. Financial restitution. Professional courtesy. Simon found his voice. Look, if this is about business, we can. But then I watched you slam a starving woman's face into a table because she asked for a job. Silence. So now, Arthur said softly, I'm going to handle it differently. The line went dead. Simon stood frozen, bourbon forgotten, staring at his reflection in the dark window. For the first time in his life, Simon Phillips felt something he didn't recognize. It took him a moment to identify it. Fear. Daniela woke to sunlight streaming through clean curtains. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The bed was too soft. The room was too quiet. The air didn't smell like mildew and desperation. Then it came back. The clinic. Dr. Hayes with his gentle hands and gentler questions. The shelter on Morrison Street, except it wasn't like any shelter she'd stayed in before. Private room. Real bed with clean sheets. A bathroom that didn't require standing in line. Food brought to her door 3 times yesterday by a woman named Rosa who smiled and said, You rest, honey. That's your only job right now. Daniela sat up slowly, testing her face. The swelling had gone down. The cuts were bandaged. The bruises had bloomed into full-color purple and yellow across her cheekbone, but the pain had dulled to a manageable ache. She walked to the small mirror above the dresser. The woman staring back still looked haunted, but for the first time in months, she also looked cared for. Who did this? The question had kept her awake most of the night. The text message had come from an unknown number. Dr. Hayes had deflected every question about payment with the same answer. Community fund. Don't worry about it. Rosa at the shelter had been similarly vague. A benefactor arranges these rooms for people who need them. No strings attached, but Daniela knew better. Nothing came without strings. She'd learned that lesson the hard way with Richard. with the landlord who'd offered her a payment plan that made her skin crawl, with the shelter director who'd suggested she could work off her stay in ways that had nothing to do with cleaning. The world didn't give to people like her. It took, so whose turn was it to take from her now? A knock on the door made her jump. "It's Rosa, sweetheart. I brought breakfast." Daniela opened the door cautiously. Rosa stood there with a tray, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, orange juice. Real food, hot food, the kind Daniela hadn't seen in weeks. "I can't afford." "It's included," Rosa interrupted gently, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "Everything here is included. Room, meals, medical care. You just focus on healing." Daniela's eyes burned. "Why? Who's paying for this?" Rosa paused at the door, her expression softening. "Someone who thinks you deserve better than what happened to you. That's all I know, honey. And that's all you need to know." She left before Daniela could ask anything else. Daniela sat down in front of the food, her hands shaking. She picked up the fork, took a bite of eggs, and immediately her body reminded her how long it had been since she'd eaten a real meal. She finished everything on the plate, then she cried. 2 days passed in a blur of rest and recovery. Dr. Hayes visited once more, checking her injuries and declaring her healing well. Rosa brought meals and clean clothes, simple things, jeans and sweaters that fit, underwear still in packages. "Donations," Rosa explained. But Daniela saw the tags still attached and knew someone had bought them specifically for her. On the 3rd day, there was a different knock. Daniela opened the door to find a man she'd never seen before, older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and a weathered face that suggested a lifetime of careful observation. "Miss Mitchell?" His voice was formal but not unkind. "My name is Thomas Gray. I work for the individual who's been assisting you. He'd like to meet with you, if you're willing. No obligation. You can refuse, and nothing about your current arrangement will change." Daniela's heart hammered. "Who is he?" "Someone who witnessed what happened at the diner. Someone who believes you were treated unjustly." Thomas Gray produced a business card, with nothing but an address and a time. "Tonight, 7 p.m. if you choose to come. A car will be waiting outside at 6:45. And if I don't come, then you continue staying here as long as you need. Your care continues. No consequences." He met her eyes steadily. "He's not that kind of man, miss." "Mitchell." Thomas Gray left. Daniela stared at the card for an hour, turning it over in her hands. Every survival instinct screamed at her to refuse, to stay hidden, to take what was being offered and not ask questions that might make it disappear. But another part of her, the part that had survived Richard's betrayal, the shelters, the hunger, the humiliation, that part wanted answers. That part wanted to look this mysterious benefactor in the eye and understand what he wanted from her. Because everyone wanted something eventually. At 6:45, Daniela walked outside. A black car waited, just as promised. The driver said nothing during the 20-minute trip through the city. Daniela watched the buildings change from the shelter's modest neighborhood to something wealthier: glass towers, expensive restaurants, streets that looked cleaned daily. They stopped in front of a building that looked more like a modern art installation than an office. All sharp angles and dark glass. Thomas Gray met her at the entrance. "7th floor, he said, guiding her to a private elevator. "He's expecting you." The elevator opened directly into an office. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was the man from the diner. Black suit, no tie, same controlled presence that had stopped Simon Phillips mid-violence. He turned as the elevator doors closed behind her. "Miss Mitchell," Arthur Vandenberge said quietly. "Thank you for coming." Daniela's first instinct was to run. Her second was to demand answers. But what came out was something else entirely. "Why?" Arthur gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." She remained standing. "Why are you helping me? What do you want?" "Nothing. Everyone wants something." Arthur's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes: recognition, perhaps, or respect. "Fair assumption. Given what you've been through, probably the only smart assumption. So what's the truth?" Arthur walked to his desk and picked up a folder. He held it but didn't open it. "The truth is, I was already investigating Simon Phillips when I witnessed what he did to you. His attack on you wasn't random cruelty, it was confirmation of something I already suspected. Which is, that he's a man who believes consequences don't apply to him. That he's dangerous not because he's powerful, but because he thinks power means he can hurt anyone weaker, without repercussion." Daniela's throat tightened. "And you're going to stop him?" I'm going to ensure he faces appropriate consequences, yes. By helping me? I don't understand. Because you were collateral damage, Arthur interrupted gently. You walked into that diner looking for work, not confrontation. You didn't deserve what happened. And in my experience, the people who suffer most from men like Simon Phillips are the ones everyone ignores. He set the folder on the desk. I'm helping you because it's right, not because I want something from you. Daniela stared at him, searching for deception. But his expression remained calm, open, honest. I don't believe you, she whispered. I know. Arthur moved back to the window. That's why I'm not asking for anything in return. Stay at the shelter. Take time to heal. When you're ready, Rosa will help you find work, real work, legitimate employers, fair wages, or don't. The choice is entirely yours. Then why am I here? Why did you want to meet me? Arthur was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned back to her. Because I wanted you to know you're not invisible, Miss Mitchell. Simon Phillips treated you like you were nothing. I needed you to understand that you're not. Something cracked in Daniela's chest, the armor she'd built over 3 months of being discarded and dismissed and destroyed. She sat down abruptly, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. Arthur remained by the window, giving her space. What happens now? Daniela asked finally. That depends. Arthur's voice was careful. On whether you want it to end here, or whether you want to be part of making sure Simon Phillips answers for what he did. Daniela looked up sharply. How? Arthur opened the folder. Tell me everything you remember from that day. Every detail, no matter how small. And then tell me what you noticed about him that no one else saw. Daniela stared at the folder Arthur had placed on the desk between them. What I noticed? She repeated slowly. I was being beaten. I wasn't exactly taking notes. You'd be surprised what people notice under stress. Arthur sat down across from her, his posture relaxed but attentive. The brain records details we don't realize we've captured. Tell me about the moments before the violence started. Daniela closed her eyes, and the memory came flooding back with unwelcome clarity. He was eating alone, she began. That stood out because the place was busy. Most tables had 2 or more people, but he had that booth to himself. The food in front of him was barely touched, like he'd ordered it for appearance, not because he was hungry. Arthur made a note. Go on. His phone was face up on the table. He kept glancing at it, but it wasn't ringing. He was checking something. Messages, maybe? Or waiting for a call that hadn't come. Daniela opened her eyes. He seemed agitated before I even approached him. Good. What else? His friends' 2 younger guys were sitting 3 tables away. Not with him. They were watching him, though. Like they were waiting for something. Daniela frowned, the details sharpening as she spoke them aloud. When he started hitting me, they didn't seem surprised. They laughed, but it wasn't shock laughter. It was like they'd seen him do it before. Arthur's pen moved faster across his notepad. Did he say anything to them? Before or during? Daniela thought back. After. When he let me go, he turned to them and said, Some people need to learn their place. Like he was, performing. Like the whole thing was a show for their benefit. It was, Arthur said quietly. Men like Simon need witnesses. Cruelty without an audience doesn't satisfy them. They need people to see their power and either approve or fear it. Daniela felt something cold settle in her stomach. How many times has he done this? I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. Arthur looked up from his notes. What happened after I left? Did he say anything else? He sat back down like nothing had happened. Ordered one of his friends to get the waitress. Complained that his food was cold. Daniela's hands clenched in her lap. The manager came over, apologizing to him, asking if he wanted a fresh meal on the house. Nobody even looked at me. Did you hear him mention any names? Make any calls? Daniela shook her head, then stopped. Wait. When the manager came over, Simon said something about handling it like the Mitchell situation. The manager went pale and said he'd take care of everything personally. Arthur's pen stopped moving. Mitchell situation. You're certain? Yes. Why? Does that mean something? Arthur was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he opened the folder and turned it toward her. Inside were photographs, documents, printed emails. Simon Phillips has been systematically terrorizing small business owners for the past 2 years, Arthur explained. He targets people who can't fight back immigrants, single parents, anyone operating on narrow margins. He identifies businesses in areas his father's company wants to develop, then makes their lives hell until they're desperate enough to sell for nothing. Daniela looked at the photos. A Korean grocery store with smashed windows. A family restaurant with a foreclosure notice. A dry cleaner whose owner had a black eye in his license photo. The Mitchell situation, Arthur continued, was a bodega owner named James Mitchell. He refused to sell. 2 weeks later, his store burned down. Arson was suspected, but never proved. James lost everything and left the city. Daniela felt sick, and nobody stopped him. People tried, but Simon's father is Gregory Phillips, real estate mogul, major political donor, friend to police commissioners and district attorneys. Complaints disappear, witnesses recant, evidence vanishes. Arthur's voice remained calm, but something hardened in his eyes. The system protects men like Simon Phillips. So we work outside the system. We? Arthur gestured to the folder. I've been documenting Simon's activities for 6 weeks. I have financial records showing his shell companies. I have testimony from 3 victims willing to speak anonymously. I have shipping manifests proving he's been stealing from my business operations. Then why do you need me? Because you have something none of them have. Arthur leaned forward slightly. You can identify the pattern in real time. Just now, you remembered details that connect to other incidents I'm investigating. The manager's reaction, the friends watching, the performance aspect. All of it helps build a complete picture. Daniela looked down at the photos again. All those people. All that suffering. What you're really asking, she said slowly, is if I'll help you destroy him. I'm asking if you want to help ensure he faces consequences for what he's done. Not just to you, to everyone. Arthur's gaze didn't waver. But I need you to understand something, Miss Mitchell. This won't be quick, and it won't be safe. Simon Phillips is dangerous. If he discovers you're involved, he already destroyed my life once, Daniela interrupted. I have nothing left to lose. That's not true. You have your safety, your future, the chance to rebuild without looking over your shoulder. Daniela met his eyes. Do you really believe that? That I can just move on and pretend this never happened? That he won't do this to someone else tomorrow? Arthur was quiet. I spent 3 months invisible, Daniela continued, her voice gaining strength. 3 months where people looked through me like I didn't exist. Richard took everything from me because the law said he could. Simon beat me in front of a room full of people because he knew nobody would stop him. I'm tired of being powerless. This won't make you powerful, Arthur warned. It will make you useful. There's a difference. Then teach me the difference. Daniela pulled the folder closer. Tell me what you need. For the next 2 hours, Arthur walked her through his investigation. He showed her financial documents she didn't fully understand, but could see the patterns in money moving in circles. Companies that existed only on paper. Transactions that happened just below legal reporting thresholds. He showed her surveillance photos of Simon meeting with city officials, contractors, his father's business associates. He explained how Simon's operation worked. Identify target, apply pressure, wait for desperation, acquire property at a fraction of its value, flip it to his father's development company for massive profit. It's legal enough to avoid prosecution, Arthur explained, but built on a foundation of intimidation and violence. The courts can't touch him because the victims are too scared to testify, and the evidence is always 1 degree removed from directly linking back to him. So how do we stop him? We don't stop him through courts. Arthur closed the folder. We dismantle his support structure. His friends, his business partners, his protection. We make him radioactive, and then we make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man he is. Daniela absorbed this. That sounds like it takes time. It does. Weeks, maybe months, which is why I need someone who can watch, listen, and remember details others miss. Someone he's already dismissed as irrelevant. Arthur paused. Someone like you. You want me to get close to him? Daniela's stomach turned. I can't. No, never directly. That would be too dangerous. Arthur shook his head firmly. But I need someone who can observe from a distance, who can spot inconsistencies in his patterns, who can help me connect pieces I might miss because I'm too focused on the business aspect. He pulled out a new folder thinner than the first. These are Simon's known associates, his friends, his employees, the businesses he frequents. I need you to study them. When you see them in my surveillance photos or reports, I need you to tell me what doesn't fit, what looks wrong, what seems off. Daniela opened the folder carefully. Inside were dossiers on the 2 friends from the diner, Tyler Bradshaw and James Cordova, both from wealthy families, both with minor criminal records that had been expunged. both employed by Phillips Enterprises in vague, consulting roles that seemed to require no actual work. "You have a gift, Miss Mitchell," Arthur said quietly. "You notice things. It's probably why you survived 3 months on the street when others wouldn't have lasted 3 weeks. That skill, that awareness is exactly what I need." Daniela looked up at him. "And you really don't want anything else from me?" "I want Simon Phillips to face justice. You want the same thing. Our goals align." Arthur stood. "But if at any point you want to stop, you stop. No questions, no consequences. The help I've provided isn't conditional on your participation." He walked to the window, giving her space to decide. Daniela looked down at the folder in her hands, at the faces of men who'd laughed while she bled. She thought about James Mitchell's burned bodega, about the other victims in Arthur's photographs, about 3 months of being invisible while the world stepped over her. "When do we start?" she asked. Arthur turned back to her, and for the first time, something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "We already have." Tyler Bradshaw sat in his father's study, staring at the letter in his hands, and tried to remember why being Simon's friend had ever seemed like a good idea. The letter was from Harvard Law School, the program he'd been accepted to 3 months ago, the future his family had planned since he was 12 years old. "We regret to inform you that your admission has been rescinded following a review of your conduct." Tyler read it twice, his hands shaking. His father stood by the window, silent. That was worse than yelling. Richard Bradshaw didn't yell. He simply withdrew support, and in their world, withdrawal of support meant the end of everything. "I didn't do anything," Tyler said finally. "This is insane. They can't just—" "They can." His father's voice was cold. "Someone sent them video footage of you participating in an assault, in a public establishment, while laughing and filming." Tyler's stomach dropped. "The diner thing? That was Simon. I was just there. I didn't touch that woman. You stood by. You recorded it. You laughed." Richard turned from the window. "Do you understand how this reflects on our family? On the firm? I have clients who donate to Harvard. I have partnerships that depend on our reputation. Dad, please." "You're cut off. Effective immediately. No trust fund access. No allowance. No family connections." Richard's expression was granite. "You want to behave like you're untouchable? Find out what it's like to touch the ground." Tyler opened his mouth to argue, but his father was already walking toward the door. "Figure out who you are without my name protecting you. If you manage that, we'll talk." The door closed. Tyler sat alone in the study, the Harvard letter crumpling in his fist. His phone buzzed. A text from James Cordova. "James, dude, we need to talk. Something's wrong." Across the city, James Cordova was having his own crisis. The trust fund he'd been living off since graduation, the one that paid for his penthouse, his car, his lifestyle had been frozen. Not empty, frozen. His lawyer had been apologetic but clear. "There's an ongoing investigation into financial irregularities with Phillips Enterprises. Because you're listed as a consultant, your accounts are subject to scrutiny. This could take months to resolve." "Months," James had nearly shouted. "I have rent due in 3 days. I have car payments. I have—" "You should consider alternative employment," the lawyer had suggested gently. James had hung up. Now he sat in his penthouse for 3 more days, anyway, and tried to understand how his life had fallen apart in less than a week. The investigation had come out of nowhere. Federal agents asking questions about shell companies, shipping manifests, real estate transactions. James didn't know anything about the actual business side of Phillips Enterprises. He'd been hired because his father was a city councilman, and Simon wanted the connection. But apparently, being tangentially connected was enough to destroy everything. His phone rang. "Simon." James almost didn't answer. "What the hell is happening?" James demanded the moment he picked up. "Stay calm," Simon said, but his voice was tighter than usual. "It's a fishing expedition. They're trying to scare us. Well, it's working. My accounts are frozen, Simon. Frozen. I can't access my own money. It's temporary. My father's lawyers are handling it. Your father's lawyers aren't returning my calls." Silence on the other end. "Simon? Look, just keep your head down. Don't talk to anyone. This will blow over. Tyler got kicked out of Harvard. Did you know that?" More silence. "Simon, what did you do?" "Nothing. This isn't about the diner. This is about business. Someone's trying to undermine my father's company. By destroying our lives? That doesn't make sense. Just trust me. I'll fix this." The line went dead. James stared at his phone. For the first time in years, he wondered if trusting Simon Phillips had been the biggest mistake of his life. Gregory Phillips sat across from his lawyer in a conference room that cost more per hour than most people made in a week. "Explain to me," Gregory said quietly, "how my son's activities have resulted in a federal investigation into my company." The lawyer, a man named Mitchell Stokes, who'd protected the Phillips family for 2 decades, looked genuinely uncomfortable. "The investigation appears to be targeting irregularities in your subsidiary shipping operations. Specifically, misrouted cargo, unaccounted inventory, and suspicious financial transfers through shell companies registered to Bennett and Associates." Gregory's jaw tightened. "Bennett and Associates. That's Simon's operation." "Yes. And you're telling me federal investigators connected my company to his side projects?" "Not just connected. They have documentation. Shipping manifests with your company's logos, warehouse receipts, financial transfers that originate from Phillips Enterprises accounts before being laundered through Bennett and Associates." Stokes paused. "Someone provided them with everything they needed to establish a direct link. Who? We don't know. But whoever it is, they've been gathering evidence for months. This isn't a random audit, Gregory. This is targeted." Gregory stood and walked to the window. 30 years building his empire. 30 years of careful maneuvering, strategic donations, cultivated relationships. And his son had jeopardized it all for what? Pocket money? The thrill of stealing? "What's our exposure?" Gregory asked. "Legally? Minimal, if we act quickly. We can claim Simon was operating independently, without company authorization, cut ties, cooperate with investigators, minimize damage. And personally," Stokes hesitated, "your reputation will take a hit. The charity boards, the development partnerships, the political connections, they'll all distance themselves until this resolves. Maybe permanently." Gregory closed his eyes. "There's something else," Stokes continued carefully. "The investigator leading this has been making inquiries about Simon's personal conduct. The restaurant incidents, the harassment complaints, the settlements your office arranged, those were handled quietly." "They were. But someone's been talking to those victims, offering them legal representation, encouraging them to go public." Gregory turned slowly. "Who?" "We don't know. But whoever is orchestrating this isn't interested in just business prosecution. They're building a character case. They want to destroy Simon completely." For a long moment, Gregory said nothing. Then, "Set up a meeting with Simon, today." Simon arrived at his father's office that evening expecting strategy. Instead, he found judgment. Gregory stood behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back, expression colder than Simon had ever seen. "To do." Simon sat. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Dad, if this is about the investigation, this is about everything." Gregory's voice was quiet, controlled, lethal. "The theft, the shell companies, the intimidation tactics, the public assault that was recorded and distributed. Every stupid, arrogant decision you've made coming due all at once." Simon felt his chest tighten. "I was expanding our operations, making moves you were too cautious to. You were stealing, from partners I've worked with for years, from operations that require discretion and trust." Gregory leaned forward. "Do you understand what you've cost me? The relationships you've destroyed? The reputation you've damaged? I can fix this." "No." Gregory's voice was final. "You can't, because you're no longer affiliated with Phillips Enterprises. Effective immediately, you're terminated. No severance, no references, no family backing." Simon stood abruptly. "You can't do this. I'm your son. You're a liability, and I don't protect liabilities. I eliminate them. Dad, the penthouse is company property. You have 48 hours to vacate. Your company credit cards are canceled. Your trust fund access is revoked pending resolution of the investigation." Gregory's expression never changed. "You wanted to prove you could operate independently? Prove it." Simon felt the room tilt. "This is because of that woman? The diner? That's what this is really about? This is about you thinking consequences don't apply to you, thinking you could act without restraint because my name would protect you." Gregory walked to the door and opened it. "You were wrong. Who's doing this?" Simon's voice rose. "Someone's targeting me. Someone set this up. If you'd just help me find out who." "I know who." Simon froze. "What?" "Arthur Vandenberge. The man you stole from. The man you dismissed in that diner." Gregory's smile was bitter. "The man whose operation you didn't bother researching before you decided to cheat him." The name hit Simon like a physical blow. "He's been dismantling you piece by piece," Gregory continued. "And I'm not going to stop him. Because maybe losing everything is the only way you'll learn that real power doesn't come from hurting people weaker than you. Gregory gestured to the hallway. Get out of my office, Simon. And don't come back. Simon stood there, speechless, as his father turned away. And for the first time in his life, Simon Phillips understood what it meant to be alone. Simon Phillips sat in the basement of a building he didn't recognize, at a table he hadn't chosen, waiting for a man he'd underestimated. The room was concrete and sparse. One table, 2 chairs, a single overhead light that cast harsh shadows. No windows. One door locked from the outside. Simon had arrived 30 minutes ago, escorted by 2 men who'd said nothing except, "Mr. Vandenberg is expecting you." He'd considered running, but where would he go? His penthouse was gone. His bank accounts were frozen. His father had disowned him. His friends had stopped answering his calls. The door opened. Arthur Vandenberg entered, wearing the same black suit Simon remembered from the diner. No tie. Calm expression. He carried a folder and set it on the table before sitting down across from Simon. "Thank you for coming," Arthur said quietly. "Like I had a choice." "You always have choices, Simon. You've simply run out of good ones." Arthur opened the folder. "Let's review what's happened over the past 3 weeks." Simon's jaw clenched. "Your trust fund has been frozen due to ongoing federal investigation. Your employment with Phillips Enterprises has been terminated. Your father has publicly distanced himself from you. Your friends Tyler Bradshaw and James Cordova have both retained separate legal counsel and are cooperating with investigators." Arthur's voice never rose. "Your penthouse has been vacated. Your car has been repossessed. Your club memberships have been revoked." "You did this," Simon hissed. "I provided evidence of crimes you committed. The consequences are yours." Arthur turned a page. "Let's talk about those crimes. Theft of approximately $400,000 in rerouted shipments. Fraud through shell company operations. Intimidation and assault of 7 documented victims. Conspiracy to commit arson in the Mitchell Bodega case." Simon's face went pale. "You can't prove the arson." "Actually, I can. James Mitchell kept security footage you didn't know about. Your friend Tyler is visible in the background. He's already confirmed you paid him to handle it." Arthur looked up. He was very cooperative once he understood his options. Tyler would do anything to avoid federal prison. So would James. They've both provided detailed testimony about your operations, your methods, your explicit instructions. Arthur closed the folder. "You taught them well, Simon. When faced with consequences, protect yourself first." Simon slammed his hands on the table. "What do you want? Money? I don't have access to." "I don't want your money." "Then what?" Arthur leaned back in his chair, studying Simon with those cold, calm eyes. "I want you to understand something. You walked into that diner and brutalized a woman who was starving, who'd lost everything, who came to you asking for work, not money, not pity, just a chance to survive. And you slammed her face into a table because it entertained you. I didn't know who she was. It wouldn't have mattered if you did. That's the point." Arthur's voice remained quiet, but something sharp entered it. "You've spent your entire life hurting people who couldn't hurt you back, taking from people who had nothing left to lose. And you never faced consequences because your father's money insulated you from reality. So this is revenge? For her? This is justice. For everyone you've destroyed." Arthur stood. "The federal prosecutors have everything they need to charge you with multiple felonies. Your father's lawyers won't represent you. Your friends have testified against you. And the victims you silenced are coming forward now that they know you can't retaliate." Simon's breathing quickened. "How long? In prison?" 8 to 12 years. Assuming you cooperate. More if you don't. I'll fight this. I'll hire. With what money, Simon? Arthur moved toward the door. You have nothing. No resources. No allies. No protection. You're experiencing what all your victims experienced, being completely powerless while the system grinds you down. Simon stood abruptly, his chair scraping concrete. You can't do this. I'm a Phillips. My family. Your family abandoned you. Because that's what happens when you become a liability instead of an asset. Arthur paused at the door. You told that woman she needed to learn her place. Now you're learning yours. Wait. Simon's voice cracked. Please, there has to be something. Some deal. I'll cooperate. I'll testify against my father. Your father committed no crimes. You acted independently, remember? That's what your own lawyer will argue to minimize his exposure. Simon felt his legs weaken. Then what do you want from me? Arthur turned back, and for the first time, something that might have been emotion flickered across his face. I want you to spend the next decade thinking about every person you hurt, every business you destroyed, every life you treated as disposable. I want you to understand that real power isn't about making people fear you. It's about making choices that don't require you to destroy others to feel important. You're no better than me, Simon spat. You're doing the same thing, destroying someone weaker. No, Simon, I'm ensuring you face consequences you should have faced years ago. There's a difference. Arthur opened the door. The prosecutors will contact you within the hour. I'd suggest you cooperate fully. It won't save you, but it might reduce your sentence. I'll tell them about you, about this meeting, about what? A businessman providing evidence of crimes to federal investigators? Please do. They already know everything. Arthur stepped into the hallway. Goodbye, Simon. I hope prison teaches you what privilege never could. The door closed. Simon stood alone in the concrete room, and for the first time in his life, truly understood what it meant to have nothing. Daniela walked into the diner on a Tuesday morning, her resume folded in her hands. The same diner, the same tables, the same booth where Simon Phillips had sat 6 weeks ago and changed her life. But everything felt different now. The manager, an older man named Frank, who'd stood silent that day while she bled, looked up from the register. His expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something like shame. Can I help you? He asked quietly. Daniela set her resume on the counter. I'm here about the waitress position. The sign says you're still hiring. Frank picked up the resume, glanced at it, then met her eyes. Listen, about what happened here. I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to apply for a job. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. You have restaurant experience? Some. A few years ago. I'm a fast learner. Can you start tomorrow? Daniela blinked. That's it? You're hiring me? I've been trying to hire someone for 3 weeks. Nobody wants the position. Frank's voice was rough. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For not stopping what happened. For protecting him instead of you. I was wrong. Daniela felt something tight in her chest loosen. Thank you. 6 a.m. tomorrow. Training starts at 6:30. Wear comfortable shoes. She nodded and turned to leave. Miss Mitchell? She paused. That man who helped you. The one in the black suit. Frank's expression was cautious. He came back here a week later. Told me if I ever saw that kind of thing happen again and didn't stop it, I'd regret it. I believed him. Daniela smiled faintly. You should have. She walked out into the morning sun. Rosa was waiting outside, leaning against her car, a proud smile on her face. They'd driven here together, moral support, Rosa had called it. Well? Rosa asked. I start tomorrow. Rosa pulled her into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you, honey. Daniela hugged her back, tears threatening but not falling. Thank you. For everything. You did this yourself. I just kept you fed while you figured it out. They drove back to the Morrison Street shelter, though Daniela had her own apartment now. Small, studio, but hers. Paid for with the money she'd earned, helping Arthur document Simon's crimes. Real work, real payment, nothing she hadn't earned. Arthur had offered more, a permanent position, better pay, involvement in other investigations, but Daniela had declined. I need to rebuild my life, she'd explained. Not build a new one inside yours. Arthur had understood. He'd helped her find the apartment, co-signed the lease when her credit was too damaged, and then stepped back. No strings, no expectations, just like he'd promised. That evening, Daniela sat in her apartment and opened her laptop. She'd started writing 3 weeks ago, not for publication, just for herself. A way to process everything that had happened, the loss, the humiliation, the slow climb back. But tonight, she opened a different document. A letter. Dear Mr. Vandenberg, I've started this letter 6 times and deleted it each time because I don't know how to thank someone for giving me back. Something I didn't realize. I'd lost my belief that people can be good without wanting something in return. You helped me when I had nothing to offer. You treated me like I mattered when the world had convinced me I didn't. You gave me the chance to be part of stopping someone who hurt a lot of people, including me. And then you stepped back and let me rebuild on my own terms. I'm writing to tell you that I got the job. At the diner, same place where everything fell apart. It felt important to go back there as someone employed, not someone begging. Frank apologized. I don't know if that matters, but I think it might eventually. I also want you to know that I understand now what you meant about power. Real power isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need witnesses or applause. It just moves, quietly, carefully, until everything shifts and people like Simon Phillips realize too late that they were never as untouchable as they believed. Thank you for teaching me that. And thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. I hope you're well. Daniela Mitchell. She read it 3 times, then closed the laptop without sending it. Some gratitude didn't need to be spoken. Some debts didn't need to be acknowledged. Some people helped because it was right, and expecting recognition defeated the purpose. Daniela stood and walked to her small kitchen. She made tea, real tea, not the cheap packets from gas stations. She sat by the window and watched the city lights, and she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could actually get better. Arthur Vandenberge stood at the window of his office, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold. His phone buzzed. A message from Thomas Gray. Phillips sentencing today. Thought you'd want to know. Arthur didn't respond. He'd known the date for weeks. Simon Phillips would stand before a judge this morning and hear his sentence. 8 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 5. His cooperation had reduced what could have been 15. His father wouldn't attend. His friends had moved on. The victims he'd terrorized would finally have closure. Arthur felt no satisfaction. Justice wasn't meant to feel good. It was meant to restore balance. Another message arrived. This one from an unknown number. A photo. Daniela Mitchell, wearing a waitress uniform, standing behind the counter of the diner. She was smiling not broadly, but genuinely. A customer sat at the counter, coffee in hand, laughing at something she'd said. No message accompanied the photo, just the image. Arthur saved it and set his phone down. He thought about the day he'd walked into that diner for a simple meal and witnessed something that confirmed what he'd already suspected, that Simon Phillips was beyond redemption, that he needed to be stopped permanently. But he also thought about what he'd gained, proof that helping someone didn't require ownership, that power used correctly could rebuild instead of destroy, that sometimes the smallest actions, a text message, a doctor's visit, a safe room, could change the trajectory of someone's entire life. Thomas Gray entered without knocking. The federal prosecutor called. Phillips accepted the plea. It's done. Good. The victims are satisfied. Mitchell's family has received restitution. The businesses he destroyed are being compensated through seized assets. Arthur nodded. And the woman? Daniela Mitchell? She's exactly where she needs to be. Arthur turned from the window. Working, rebuilding, living. Thomas studied him. You did good work here. We did good work. You, me, everyone who helped gather evidence. But you're the one who saw it through. Arthur didn't respond. They stood in comfortable silence. Then Thomas asked the question Arthur had been waiting for. What's next? Arthur walked to his desk and opened a new folder. Inside were documents, photographs, preliminary surveillance reports. There's a developer on the west side targeting immigrant families, buying buildings, evicting tenants, demolishing homes. His methods are legal but ruthless. Arthur looked up. I'd like to have a conversation with him. Thomas smiled faintly. I'll make the arrangements. He left. Arthur sat down and reviewed the new case. Another powerful man who believed consequences didn't apply to him. Another investigation that would take patience, documentation, careful maneuvering. Another opportunity to prove that real power didn't shout. It watched. It waited. It moved when the moment was right. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. Thank you. 2 words. Nothing more. Arthur typed a response. You're welcome. Keep moving forward. He sent it and deleted the conversation. Some connections didn't need to be maintained. Some debts didn't need to be acknowledged. Some people helped because it was right, not because they wanted credit. Arthur closed the folder and stood. The city spread out before him, millions of people living their lives, most of them good, some of them predatory, all of them navigating systems designed to protect the powerful. But systems had cracks. And in those cracks, men like Arthur operated. Not heroes, not villains. Just people who understood that silence could be more powerful than noise, that patience could accomplish what force never would, that watching and waiting could bring down empires built on arrogance. Simon Phillips had thought power meant being loud, meant making people see him, fear him, acknowledge his dominance. Arthur Vandenberge had proved that real power doesn't shout. It watches. It waits. And when the moment comes, it moves with precision that leaves no room for escape. Simon Phillips learned that lesson in a concrete room with no exit. And somewhere in the city, a woman who'd been invisible finally felt seen. That was justice. That was enough. Thanks for staying with this story. Right till the final moment, you're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.